you see people who have this insecurity about, am I really good enough for this? Am I really qualified for this? Am I really, or do I have to shield myself in some way so no one ever finds out? And the thing that is I think it's kind of based in this idea, this really faulty idea, and especially in business, that everyone else has it figured out.
Yeah.
Trust me, no one has it figured out. No one. There's just various levels of bluster. We're all just winging it. Yes, we have various expertise and experience and stuff, but at the end of the day, we're all trying to figure things out. And so, it's like, if you're in that meeting and you have what you think is a dumb question, ask it. I've made a fantastic career out of being the dumbest guy in the room.
Welcome to Leadership Disrupted. In today's episode, I'm really intrigued to have a conversation with Chris Gray, because Chris is the founder of The Psychologist. And essentially, the focus of Chris's business is consumer psychology, human psychology, world psychology, and within that, leader psychology also comes under that same umbrella. And one of the things that I'm really excited about is just the opportunity to have a conversation about leadership, effective leadership, leadership in today's world, from a different point of view. Those of you who listen every week know that the overall goal of this podcast is to have 1,000 different points of view about what's working, what's not working. I think we have a lot of people in today's world trying to figure out what's happening with people in general, what's happening with employees. I mean, something's happening, something is shifting and changing. We know that employees have historically been challenged with, full engagement. When we do measures of employee engagement, employees have been disengaged for decades, and it's getting worse no matter what employees or no matter what employers spend to drive employee engagement. We know something's up with employees in general. We know something's up with leaders in general. And I love the opportunity to explore basically that question, what's up? And what can we do about it, with interesting thinkers, interesting minds. Amongst those is Chris Gray. So Chris, first of all, welcome to Leadership Disrupted. It's great to have you here. Could you maybe give us a bit of background, frame yourself up for us to give a sense of where we'll take the conversation?
Absolutely, Dan. Thank you for having me on. I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite a while.
For sure.
I'm Chris Gray. I am the Psychologist. That is my company. I am a consultant, and all of my work is based in consumer psychology. I've been a consumer psychologist for 30 years. After getting my doctorate in psychology, I realized that I didn't love being a therapist, but I love psychology. So I had to kind of, I guess today we would call it be agile and kind of shift on a dime and kind of explore some other territories. And I landed in marketing, and, I felt like I was like on a playground. It was, it's such an arena where psychology is so important. And is often not fully understood and can be misused. And so, I focus a lot on how to influence behavior in ways that are not manipulative, but more effective. In fact, the tagline for my company is influence customer behavior without feeling gross.
Yeah.
And, that really is the center point of everything I do. And, when we were talking about, having the show together, I started really thinking about, because I know you talk a lot about leadership. And so I wanted to really think through, how my point of view could really be relevant to your listeners. And what I realized is there's a tremendous amount of overlap between consumer psychology and leadership psychology. And precisely because in both of those arenas, you are trying to understand how best to influence behavior, right? To motivate people, to get barriers out of their way, to find strategies that make them more effective. Those are very similar in consumer psychology. So I think, there's a lot of overlap, and I'm looking forward to exploring that with you.
Years ago, when I developed a sales training program, one of the early lessons within the sales training program is we show a can of Coke and a can of Pepsi, and we talk about the classic Pepsi challenge tests that were occurring mostly in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
People would go to shopping malls and there would be a blind taste test, and then people would be surprised that with a blind taste test there was a tendency to prefer the taste of Pepsi. Uh, when that test was done, where you could actually see the brands, it flipped around and people preferred Coke. And it was a discussion we would have with salespeople about what drives that. How can just seeing your brand or your favorite brand or preferred brand shift your perception of taste, where you actually, I like this taste better, but the only difference is I can see the brand now, and that led us to typically a deep discussion about what drives human behavior, what drives decisions, and to help salespeople understand there's so much happening under the surface. You think it's features and benefits. You think it's your value proposition. You think it's these things on your list, and not that those are not valuable,
Absolutely.
and they're important, but they're only part of it. And I think you could even make the case that you have to get the value prop right to be within the zone of reason. But once you got the value prop right, there are so many other emotions that will drive when someone decides to actually spend their money. I don't know. Does that prompt any thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a classic example in consumer psychology. For that very reason, you really nailed it. They were measuring one tiny aspect of what draws people to a product. In this case, it was taste. And that's a functional benefit. That's does it taste good or not? Great. But there's so many more factors underneath the surface, and you think about what really drives someone to choose one product over another. That's how I've spent my career. And it's always far more complex than we think. Even in some of the most mundane categories. I've worked a lot in CPG, and some of those categories are not intuitively emotional. Dish soap, for example. And I can confidently tell you that I have never explored a category product in 30 years that doesn't have an emotional need at its essence for why people are motivated to purchase it. And in the case of Coke versus Pepsi, I think they were asking the wrong questions, or they were asking incomplete questions about what you prefer. Sure, a blind taste test, that's great. I mean, and I can see why Pepsi would do that, because they knew that the Coke brand was so strong, and they were trying to make a point.
That might actually be an example of gross, as you describe it, because they were consciously skewing the results to serve their desired outcome.
Yeah, and I think that when you think of what a brand is, a brand is what we like to call a heuristic in psychology. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with that, but it's basically a mental shortcut or a cognitive shortcut. Our brains are very efficient, and whenever it can sort of cut corners and be more efficient, it will. And that's where associations come in. And so brands, like when you see the Nike swoosh or you see the Coke can, it immediately brings forth associations in milliseconds before any reason has a chance to get in the door. And so if you're not being strategic about emotional engagement, then you're leaving it to chance. And, that's pretty risky. So, I think that, whenever I start working with a client, the first thing that I do is assess how emotionally engaged they are with their customers, how well they understand their customers' inner world, the emotions, the aspirations, the needs that they have, not just functionally, but also emotionally, and how their brand aims to fulfill it. And, that's where a lot of the work I do really sits.
Back in the 80s and 90s, there were a couple of oil spills where I saw that there were volunteer groups that were washing the birds, like washing the oil off the birds. And I don't know how this was arranged, but it always seemed to get mentioned that they were using Dawn dishwashing detergent to get the oil, the oil out. And I always just wondered, hey, is it really that Dawn is uniquely capable of cutting through the oil, or is that just some marketer's genius approach? Hey, let's give them as much free dawn as they want because we get these images in people's heads of washing the oil out of the birds. Either way,
Yeah.
I ended up using dawn.
Yeah. And
Most
yeah,
of
my
it.
answer was going to be, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because, when it comes, especially to, in consumer world, but I think in general, I could make this claim that it's perception that drives behavior, not reality.
Yeah.
It is our perception of the world around us, of the products, of people around us, of our jobs, or what have you, that drives our behavior. The reality is secondary, because you know it's there is sort of out there the reality of the world, but everything is filtered through our
Yeah.
perception and our perspective. And if you don't understand your customer or your employees and how they're filtering information, or situations, or
Mhm.
whatever it may be, then I think you're going to have an unfortunate disconnection that is going to impact your leadership or your marketing in very negative ways.
Can you walk us through an example of like a project that you've worked through with a client, either mentioning the client's name or keeping them anonymous, that's fine. But just to kind of give us a sense of what it's like to work with you and the kind of outcomes that you produce.
Sure. Yeah. Well, let's stick with dish soap.
Okay.
It's fresh in our minds here. Many years ago, I worked with a company, and I'll just not say the company name, just
Okay.
for whatever reason. But it was dish soap and dishwashing detergent. And the question was, this was related to the shopping environment. So this was, let's look at the way their shelves are set up, the way their information is
Mhm.
portrayed, the way they're promoting the product. Can we make improvements? Can we make this a better experience? And I'll never forget the brand manager, who was a really good guy, took me aside before we started, and we were going to do some qualitative research. I've been a qualitative researcher for 30 years. And he took me aside. He said, "Look, I know you're good, but I just don't know where we're going to go with this. Like, there's no emotion in this category. Nobody cares. He's like, I like to call it a drive-by category because they barely, stop their carts in the aisle. They just buy what they bought last time. That's the behavior." And I looked at him, I said, let's have this discussion after we
Uh-huh.
do these groups and let's see where it goes. And what was amazing was we found some really interesting emotional needs in that category. And basically, the target were busy heads of household, and typically female, but male and female, with families that were very busy, typically both parents working, children going to school or sports or what have you. So everything was moving at all times, and they had to have their home like working like clockwork, right? Because if
Mhm.
one thing went wrong, it was like a domino effect. Everything started to fall apart. And so in talking with multiple groups and individuals, what we found was that at the heart of it, the emotional need was for certainty. I need to know this is going to work. I cannot afford to take a risk and have this upset my household. Like if the dishes
Mhm.
don't get clean, then that throws everything off. And so what that meant was they were buying what they bought last time because it worked well enough. They knew
Yeah.
it worked well enough. Now, was it the best product in the category? Who knew? But they weren't willing to take that risk. And so what we did then from that insight was develop new strategy for how they promoted the product, going from just making claims about how effective it was to showing proof points. So a lot of before and after, a lot of trial, promoting trial, a lot of providing like free samples, those types of things that
Mhm.
actually allowed the person to see for themselves that this is going to work even better than what I have, and it's not going to upset my household. And that really made a big difference for that category, and the sales increased dramatically. But it was getting to that deeper insight, that it wasn't just about laziness or not caring. It was they cared very much and weren't willing to take that risk.
And that they were currently with good enough So there would be a barrier to entry, a barrier to trying, because trying something new is a risk. So how do you
Absolutely.
remove the perceived risk or reduce the perceived risk
Yeah,
of
it's very
trying
fresh
something
for me.
new?
I just wrote a Substack about the 5 types of risk that we encounter, that consumers encounter when they're going to make a purchase. And typically, that risk calculation is at its highest when they're in the moment of making that decision. And if we don't understand what they're actually dealing with, the risk that they're grappling with,
Mhm.
then we really don't have the opportunity to position ourselves in a way that reduces that risk for them. And so financial is one, psychological is one. So is this me? Does it feel like me? If I buy this, what does it say about me? Social risk, what will others think? Opportunity risk, which is usually for like bigger ticket items. So I buy this car, that means I can't have that one because I'm probably not
Yeah.
going to buy another car for a while, right? So it's understanding those risks that are happening in the very moment someone is making that decision. They may not even be consciously aware of how much they're grappling with it. And that's sometimes the hard piece of how do you get to that sort of the unspoken, right? And that's what I do. I really, I don't, I'm not one of those researchers that just takes what someone says and throws it back at the client. It's, I'm listening for what's not said. I'm listening for, clues and symbols in their language that tell us what's going on. And so getting really beneath the surface to understand those deeper needs that are driving their behavior and their decision making.
Before we deep dive into leadership, maybe let's talk about just humans in general.
Yeah.
Have you done any research or projects related to how the interaction with humans in a consumer experience impacts that consumer's perception of the product? And some products may not have a human experience. You walk along the shelf and now you've seen commercials that might count as a human experience if you see humans in the commercials. But basically, you're walking along the aisle and you pick something up. But there are other products that definitely have a human component, whether it's the person who's helping you test drive your car, or the person who's
Mm,
walking you through the house, or the person who's demonstrating the product.
yeah.
And any insights into the emotions of that human element of the product experience?
It's like many avenues of communication. That can be a big positive if you're strategic about it, or it can be a loose cannon, and be very in turn very negative. It's all a matter of, how are you empowering and training people to be really good salespeople? And I've worked with tons of sales teams over the years, and I credit the sales teams that I've worked with kind of taking me down from my academic stoop. And because you don't go into a room full of salespeople and start explaining theory, because they're just going to throw you out of the room.
Yeah.
They want
Yeah.
to know, what do we do, right? And so that it was because so many great sales teams that I've worked with that really helped me make my work more actionable. But I think that when a salesperson is well trained and they understand, at least at a basic level, the psychology of selling, what are the processes going on with somebody that I have to think about as I'm selling, right? That can really be a very positive experience. We look to others, when we're in a buying situation, we're not buying just to get more stuff. There are so many more emotional needs and experiences that fuel our desire to shop and buy items. And so when you have a human element, that can be really positive if they can know how to form a connection, if they know how to interact with empathy, trying to understand the buyer's situation, understand what are their needs, what are their aspirations, what
Mhm.
problems are they dealing with, what do they find exciting, etc. If they can, dive into that a bit and set aside their own, perceptions and perspectives, because that's typically the thing that gets in the way the most, is when we come at people in a selling situation or a leadership situation with our agenda top of mind, with our perception of the situation as like that's the end all be all, and we don't make room for that other person, and how are they seeing it? Because one of the key things, and I'm a big fan of a psychologist at Harvard. Her name's Ellen Langer. She's known as the mother of mindfulness. And,
Mhm.
I don't know about you, when I think of mindfulness, my head goes into like sort of hippie kind of new agey stuff. And she's the exact opposite of that. She's like a native New Yorker. She's got all the New York sass and all, everything. And, her perspective on mindfulness is that it's simply, you are being mindful simply when you are noticing new things in any situation. Because then when you're noticing new things, you're not operating on autopilot.
Mhm.
You're actively engaging with your environment. And I think when you're in a sales position, that's so important, to be thinking about what is there to learn here from this person? What can I learn from them that is going to help me help them? When you approach it with that, then you're approaching them with curiosity. You're setting aside what you think to understand what they think and what they need. And that's really going to fuel some great conversation, as well as your ability to persuade by adding value, not by manipulation. Um,
You
yeah.
might be able to help me with a challenge I've had. Not infrequently, I will have relatively early career folks who will come to me, usually via a message online or in some other way, and they will ask for career guidance. And the general frame of it these days is, "Hey, AI seems to be putting every career at risk. AI is really creating challenges. I need some direction. Can you give me some direction?" And with strangers, really, I don't feel comfortable getting too specific. So, but I will say to them oftentimes, one of the general guidances I could give you, if you don't have any direction right now you have to put food on the table, you have to do something. And if you can find your way toward being okay with seeking, even if it's a temporary career or position in sales, it's a set of skills, if you master, that will serve you in so many ways throughout the rest of your career. And when I have these conversations, I will make this impassioned plea that this is there, like, tactically, it's a great choice because it's like a dirty job. It's like nobody wants to do it. So it's easier to get the job. But strategically, if you do it well, selling is so incredibly fascinating because of the human psychology aspect. So, Chris, I say all of these things and I feel it, I believe it. And the response that I get is just flat. Like the moment you use the word selling, I shut down. I
Ah,
shut down.
yeah.
I've been ineffective at motivating non-sales people to even consider a career in selling. And I'm
Mm.
not asking you to persuade people to consider a career in selling, but I can see you have the same spirit. I mean, that part
Absolutely.
of what makes selling fascinating, like the non-gross selling, is
Mm.
the psychology of it. I don't know. So would you validate that? I mean,
Yeah.
how would you feel, if someone asked you, should I possibly consider taking a position in a
Yeah.
sales role?
I would
Any
give
thoughts?
I would give a qualified yes on that. You have to be in the right environment where you're going to learn to sell in a way that is adding value. Because
Yeah.
if you're learning the wrong skills, if you're learning to manipulate, if you're learning to be a pushy salesperson, that's not going to help you. So a qualified yes, assuming you are going into an environment where they take the psychology of selling very seriously, and they're not just looking to manipulate people, they're actually trying to find ways to add value. That's really
And where
important.
you in the selling role are adding value to the overall experience, and you're not being asked to just be like a talking catalog. You're
Right,
not just
absolutely.
being asked to bludgeon people into making decisions or whatever.
'Cause
Absolutely.
that's not gonna serve you in any career,
Yeah.
being the heavy or being, someone who's manipulative, it might help you in the short term, but it's gonna ultimately backfire in your career.
What one two of the lessons that I have taken away from uh, a couple of sales positions in the past. One very specific lesson A manager said to me, anytime you ask a question of a client, it should be a question that you really want to know the answer to. And if you really want to know the answer to it, you should listen carefully and ask at least one or two follow-up questions. No matter what they say,
Mm.
you should peel that layer away, one layer, two layers, three layers. And he said it does two things. You get better information, of course,
Yeah.
but mostly it says to the other person, "Oh, you're listening. You are paying attention to what I just said, and you want to peel the layers away further." And it has been such a simple little thing. It's hard. It's hard because you have to listen kind of on two levels. Like I have to listen to your answer, but then also be thinking, what else would I want to know? How can I
Yeah.
take this
Yeah.
deeper and deeper? But that, as simple as that is, that's been huge for me, not just in selling, but basically in relating to humans.
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, I've been a qualitative researcher for many years, and it is my favorite part of my job. I love the experience and the opportunity to sort of parachute into someone's life and just have a great conversation. I mean, and you must know, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and learn from it, and everyone has knowledge that I don't have. Everyone. Doesn't matter who they are. And if I make it my goal to understand them, I'm always learning, Um, and I've been in it's amazing, you know, having done this for so long, it becomes automatic for me. I it you're short of someone being like abusive or something, like whatever someone says to me, I just want to learn more.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by setting aside your own perspectives and perceptions and everything. It's not about me in anything that I bring to the table as far as my perception, my you know preconceptions is only going to get in the way of me learning deeply about this person. And so one thing that you're taught as a therapist when you're trained to be a therapist is a very simple, but not always easy, um, exercise called bracketing. But really, the hardest part of bracketing is self-awareness,
Mhm.
because you have to be really honest with yourself. We all have presuppositions. We all have, ways of looking at the world. There's nothing wrong with having, a presupposition. It's what you do with it. Do you act on it in ways that are destructive, or can you recognize this may not be true, right? Um, and so, being very forthright with yourself about what are those things. And so whenever I go into a focus group or an interview situation, I practice this. So it's like, what do I already think I know about this? Right. And you imagine that in your head. And then you imagine like putting brackets around it and setting it aside.
Mhm.
And it seems very simple. It is much more difficult than it sounds. And it is, like I said, I do it every time I'm starting a group or a, interaction where it's my job to learn and understand, because I know that anything is that my perception is just going to get in the way. And so, that is something that I think anyone in sales can practice that as well, because it's going to help you understand this person and their situation, that what they're facing so much better, that you'll be able, it won't even feel like selling. That's the beautiful part of it, is when you get selling right, it doesn't feel like selling. It feels like learning and helping, and that's how I look at it.
And making that, more than just, nice words on a bumper sticker. I mean,
Yeah,
I know there are a lot of
absolutely.
salespeople who will say those words, but it's a rare person who actually embodies that. It's like,
Yeah.
I just wanna
Yeah, it's not about
understand
the
you.
words. It's not
Yeah,
about the words. It's about the presence that you're bringing to the room. If I walk into a focus group and I'm just pretending to be interested, they're gonna they're gonna figure that out really quickly.
yeah,
You have to be genuinely curious. And the thing that's cool is, like, people are endlessly fascinating. I've been doing this for 3 decades, and I've never been bored a day in my life. People are always changing, situations are always changing, context is always changing, the world is always changing. So there's always more to learn, and it's fascinating. And the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know, and for me, it is a passion, and it's something I just really love and enjoy. So you, even when I'm selling, like I don't sell, I just listen and I
Yeah.
learn and I offer value where I can.
One of my favorite quotes is from Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. I contain multitudes. I mean, the older I get, the more profound that comment is to me, because
Mm.
every human being that I meet has layer upon layer upon layer, and you think of the few people in your life that you ever become truly intimate with. Even those people, you don't completely mine
And you
the
never will.
layers of them. Yes.
Again, because they're
Even
always
yourself.
changing.
You may think that you know yourself really well, and you can spend your entire life mining
I
your
guarantee
own.
you don't. As a
Yeah.
psychologist, I guarantee you don't.
Absolutely.
And I say that for myself as well. Like, self-discovery is a lifelong process, and it's not about getting to the end. I mean, it's the process of doing it that is the value.
So let me throw a curveball at you, because we didn't talk about this
That's
in
right.
the pre-conversation. I imagine there is a psychology to connecting with people virtually. I
Mm,
notice I don't have a theory, I don't have a model, but what I notice is there are people that I meet just like this,
mhm.
who within minutes, I feel like there's a human there. I can connect with that person. I can have real dialogue with that person, and it's great. And then there are others who are perfectly fine, nothing wrong with them.
Right.
It's just more like, well, you're an image and a voice, but I'm not really there with you. I mean, I guess, any insights in terms of
Well, I guess I have a sort of a follow-up question on that, which is that does that feel different than when you meet people in person? Because I mean, I assume you have a similar experience. Sometimes you connect with people, sometimes you don't.
it does not, and I think maybe because a lot of my interactions are virtual. I would say 2/3 virtual, 1/3, in real life.
Mhm.
Um, I've I've just noticed that there seems like there are some people who have this ability to bring a life to this, and then that just opens up so many possibilities because when I can have a conversation in the morning with someone in Australia, and then later with Singapore, and then
Amazing.
later in the UK, and if I can bring that humanity to those conversations, or they bring it to those conversations, the idea of being able to have that level of quality conversation without limitation geographically, it blows my mind. As opposed to, um, I'm of course limited geographically in terms of how how many live in real life conversations I can
Sure,
have.
sure.
But I guess, is there anything unique, or is the virtual engagement just a reflection of the normal in real life
Yeah, it's
engagement?
probably a little of both. I mean, I think there's probably a lot of overlap, but there are certainly unique aspects to it. I mean, because there can be, many reasons why, someone sitting across from you virtually may be not comfortable, may not feel like opening up on camera, may not be, comfortable with the format. There's a lot of things that can
Yeah.
feed into that. Um, so maybe they're just a different set of things than in real life. There might be just a little bit of, there's a lot of overlap, but the things that don't overlap are kind of unique and interesting. That, when you're virtual, you don't have as much data from that person as you do in real life. So that can
Yeah.
be, that can be a barrier sometimes, but it can also, like, for some people it frees them up, and so there are a lot of interesting unique differences here, but I think generally it's probably unusual that someone is completely awkward in person and completely fluent online, or vice versa.
Yeah.
So
I
yeah.
would say I think there are some tactical differences, and by that I mean, like, if I was meeting somebody in a business meeting face to face, I'm going to practice basic hygiene. I mean, I'm going to dress up. I'm going to comb my hair. I'm going to brush my teeth. I'm going to show up relatively animated. I'm going to do all of those things. And I do notice that some people in front of the camera forget their digital hygiene. It's not that it's um, even down to like you, for example. nice color, nice hair, nice glasses, nice
I
visual,
appreciate that.
nice audio. I mean, your
Yeah.
audio is good. I mean, it's
It
there's
is yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I put a lot of thought into these things. Sometimes I'm like, "Oh, man, I'm way overthinking this." But, I think it is important that, yeah, if you're it's still representing yourself, right?
yeah.
And in my case, I'm representing my business and my brand as well. And for me, it's very important that I do that in a way that feels right, and people that know me would, they would say, yeah, of course.
And then I suppose really what's happening is you're making certain that the technology brings your humanness through that, like that there's nothing because you wouldn't want to show up, in a live environment looking a little fuzzy, looking sounding a little muffled,
Right.
maybe slightly off to the side, where not quite letting people see you. All of those details, maybe they don't create it, but they allow it to flow through, assuming
Yeah.
that it exists.
Yeah, talking earlier about, emotional needs. I mean, you know, one very important emotional need that, we just have as humans is, identity and, self-creation and the way that we put ourselves out into the world and that face that we show, and then the reciprocal of that is the social aspect of it is,
Mhm.
what is this image that I'm putting out to others and how are they going to respond to it as well. And so I think,
Okay.
whether you're in person or virtual, I think those are very important. But I do think there's probably a different standard,
Yeah.
for a lot of
Uh,
people.
so let's talk about leadership and the perception of leadership and how um, leaders may sometimes get in their own way, when they're trying to influence or persuade the people that they're leading. Um, how would you describe, I guess, the connection between consumer psychology and leadership psychology?
Yeah. Well, I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think that the biggest overlap that I see, the most significant overlap, really, and meaningful overlap, is in both of those scenarios. You are ultimately trying to influence behavior, right? If you're leading people, you want them to follow you. You want them to rally together. Whatever that may be. And so ultimately it is very much about how do I influence people? How do I motivate people? How do I,
Mhm.
get them to improve, or how do I get them to, take on big tasks and those types of things? In the consumer world, it's much more about, how do we create lifelong buyers? How do we create relationships? I mean, again, in
Mhm.
leadership, relationships, right? Um, and so I think that there's a lot that goes into both of these arenas that are very helpful from a psychology standpoint. One of the things that I talk about as it relates to brands is the quality of the relationship that you have with your consumers, and I think that's very relevant to leaders, I have a 5 point sort of assessment, if you will, of what makes for a healthy, positive, long lasting relationship between a brand and a customer.
Mhm.
And I think it applies almost directly between leadership and their teams. And I call it the 5 Fs. So, it's uh, are you familiar? And these are all two-way, by the way. So
Sure.
you should be thinking about this as a leader, as am I familiar with my team? How well do I actually know them? And are they familiar with me? How well do they understand my goals and what I'm trying to accomplish and how I go about these tasks? That familiarity is very important, and are they um, felt deeply, so thinking about it not just from a transactional standpoint, but how are you, reflect, or how are you fulfilling emotional needs? And I know that in the business world, oftentimes you bring up the word emotion, it's like, there's a lot of pushback on that. But again, people, this is what I say to brands, this is what I would say to leadership, is people respond to situations with emotion first, logic later. we can respond to an emotional stimuli in 30 milliseconds. Logic takes much longer because they have to process it through our brain, right? And where we have shortcuts for emotion. Um, and so if you're not being strategic about the types of emotional responses you're looking for and how do I create that? How do I, develop this with my people? Then you're leaving it to chance. And it's not like there's either emotion or not. There's emotion. Can you accept and strategize for that or not?
Oh, and that what you just said is so huge. The relationship between a leader and one of their followers or subordinates is so emotional, and you can't opt out. So
No.
you make direct eye contact, it drives an emotion. You glance away, drives an emotion. You
Yeah.
ignore a comment, you laugh, you don't laugh, you respond, you don't respond. Your lack of response is itself a response and will drive an emotion in some people. So accepting that your relationship with your followers is a deeply emotional relationship, I will say that's an overwhelming thought for a lot of
Yeah.
leaders today to think that I can't I can't opt out. Well, then
Mhm.
do I be a cheerleader? Do
Yeah.
I be a taskmaster? Do I be a coach, a mentor, a guide, a parent?
Yeah.
What am I supposed to do?
Yeah, I think, and I want to acknowledge that this is hard work. This is difficult stuff. Emotion is, it's the messy side of humans, and human
Mhm.
behavior. It's for some reason it's what I relish. I love the messy side of things. But yeah, this stuff is hard. It is difficult. And typically, I mean, you're not, as you're coming up the ranks in a organization, you're not taught how to deal with that. No one takes you aside and says, let's talk about how to deal with emotion, unless it because like you have a huge problem, an HR
Yeah.
problem or something, and then who knows. But so I don't think there's any shame in feeling overwhelmed by it or feeling like you're not prepared for that, because I think very few people are adequately prepared for that. Now, there are people who are naturally more prone to be able to handle emotion and strategize and think really through the emotion they want, how to get it. Um, but that's a minority. And so, I think it's okay to acknowledge that it is overwhelming and difficult. It still doesn't let you opt out though, right? So you still have to find ways to learn and grow and develop, but you can't do that if you don't first say, "Hey, this is hard stuff and I'm not equipped for it right now," you know?
Well, they may not call it opting out, but I know there are leaders who psychologically attempt to do that by focusing on your OKRs, focusing on your project metrics,
Sure.
focusing on your tasks. Let's get together for our weekly meeting and let's go through all of our bullet points, our punch lists. And not that those things aren't important. Of course they're important, but I see many leaders who over-index toward all of those metrics,
Mhm.
and it sucks the life out of the conversation, and they feel good. Oh yes, our projects are progressing. We're achieving our goals. We're achieving our OKRs. Um, oh man, why is our turnover rate so high? Or why did suddenly we're not realizing why people are leaving us? Because yes, they're getting stuff done, but that's only part of the work experience, and um, almost none of us likes being viewed as a factory worker on the factory floor. Just hey, like Lucy, trying to put uh, 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 nuts sprinkles on chocolates as they pass through,
Right.
faster and faster and faster.
Exactly.
Most of us are looking for something deeper, and yet I think, and I don't want to overgeneralize, but leaders of a certain generation, my generation, it turns out,
Right.
I think, have a tendency to over-index toward tasks and
Right.
projects because it's a little uncomfortable. The moment you say to the moment you ask an employee, "Hey, how was your weekend?" And if you really assuming you really care, the danger is they will tell you. Or, "Hey, how's it
Right.
going?" Or, "Hey, you seem a little down today. How are things going?" You may ask those questions, and sure enough, someone's gonna say, um, "Not so great." And I'm gonna this is an actual example. Last week, one of the leaders that I'm coaching, he said, okay, I really screwed up because I was talking to one of my employees, younger guy. I asked him how things were going, and he was in kind of a down mood. And he said, it's really a tough week. My dog, my beagle, passed away. And the leader that was talking to me said, in that moment, I panicked because I knew there was a right answer. Like I should empathize with the beagle passing away, but I didn't know how. I didn't know what to say.
Mm.
And so I changed the subject, and then I instantly knew that was not right. He said it was like a downward spiral. And so then we had a chance to talk about that. But I think in today's world of work, employees are yearning for those more human connections, and they want a leader not to cry with them over their beagle.
Absolutely.
Although,
yeah, that's not necessary. But
if
I
you've
mean,
ever had a dog, pass away, you know how emotional that can be. But to at least empathize with
yeah,
what people are going through. We're all going through stuff. And
yeah, I think there's some, there's still this lingering thought in leadership that showing any kind of weakness is a negative. Showing being open, being having an emotional connection, in a non-HR kind of way, is weakness. And I think it's anything but. It takes strength to lead with emotion. It takes strength and self-knowledge to be able to do that deftly. But I think that there still is this lingering idea that emotion equals weakness. And, that I think hurts a lot of people who could be really great leaders because they go into these situations like that, feeling uncomfortable because they can't show weakness or they can't, let their personal side out. And I just, maybe there was a time for that. But it certainly hasn't been in recent history.
I think there is a battle, an internal battle for the hearts and minds of leaders right now, because some leaders, because it is uncomfortable, are actually indexing in the opposite direction. Yeah, I mean, you see examples of really like hard leaders. We're going to be the warrior leader. We're going to be the driver leader. We're going to be the pusher, the compliant leader. And there's always, of course, there are times for driving and pushing. But I think figuring out how to be the leader who matters deeply with that lighter touch, who engages deeply with that more human understanding of the people that they're working with, that is hard work. Yeah. And it is harder than just managing OKRs. And I think, unfortunately, you see this, when I hear people talk about being anti-woke, anti-sensitive, like we're feeling too much.
Right.
I don't have a political argument. What I think I see is discomfort with that and not knowing what to do with that. So I'm going to just index towards what I know.
It's born of a deep insecurity. And when you feel that level of insecurity, then any kind of emotion, any kind of consideration feels like a threat, because it will evoke something in you that you're not prepared to deal with. And so I think, I try to approach those conversations with grace, and certainly if I'm in like a research mode, I just would explore if it was relevant. But
leaders are under a lot of pressure because many of them were given their leadership position. They've earned their leadership position because of time, maybe expertise, tactically speaking. Over a period of time, they may rise to a point where they don't actually know that they feel competent to be in the position that they're in. They feel a little at risk. And so they want a bit of a bubble around them, because that bubble keeps them safe. It keeps them from revealing that, in fact, the king doesn't have as many clothes as he thinks he might have.
It's interesting, because imposter syndrome is real. I think, and you're right. Like, I think many, many times people, and I put myself in this when I was in corporate world, you make it through the ranks because you're good at technically what you do. There's very little consideration for how good are you with people, and then people are left on their own to figure that out or not. And so you see people who have this insecurity about, am I really good enough for this? Am I really qualified for this? Am I really, or do I have to shield myself in some way so no one ever finds out? And the thing that is I think it's kind of based in this idea, this really faulty idea, and especially in business, that everyone else has it figured out.
Yeah.
Trust me, no one has it figured out. No one. There's just various levels of
Mhm.
cluster. We're all just winging it. Yes, we have various expertise and experience and stuff, but at the end of the day, we're all trying to figure things out. And so, it's like if you're in that meeting and you have what you think is a dumb question, ask it. I've made a fantastic career out of being the dumbest guy in the room. You know, that's what I do for a living. I get curious about people or situations, and and I think early on, I was hesitant to do that for that very reason. I don't want to look stupid. And but once you kind of put yourself in the mindset of no one really knows what,
Yeah.
no one really, really knows. Like everyone has some degree of insecurity. It kind of changes things for you. And the reason no one knows is not because people are sort of inadequate in some way. It's because the world is always changing. Context is always changing. People are always changing. Ellen Langer does this great. I'm gonna rip off an exercise from her. She talks about how there's always more to be curious about because everything's changing, and also even the most basic facts are constantly changing based on context. So if I ask you, what is 1 + 1? Your answer is
2.
correct, right? Basic. Everyone
Yeah.
knows that. That is
Mhm.
foundational knowledge, right?
Sure.
What about one cloud plus another cloud?
Oh, that's one cloud.
That's one big cloud, right? So
Yeah.
depending on the situation, and thank you, Ellen Langer, for that.
Yeah.
Uh, Depending on the situation, even the most basic facts can be in flux. And so we can look at that and think, and let that fuel our curiosity about any situation, because context, as I've said for decades, context is decisive. Context determines our understanding of anything around us. If we're in a bad mood one day, every song we hear on the radio we hate. If we're in a great mood, every
Mhm.
song on the radio is like, yeah, this is great. And there's so many things that go into how we perceive the world. And so, let that fuel your curiosity, that even there's always more to learn. There's always more to discover.
I have had those days where every song on the radio makes me cry. It's like, "Oh, it's Taylor Swift is sad. Everything seems sad." Absolutely. I do think that, I thought you said something that prompted in the thought. Now I'm trying to grab it back, like pull it back. When it comes to leaders and their emotions, um, feeling comfortable being vulnerable,
Mm,
that's a tough one for leaders because you can over-index toward that. I mean, I've
sure.
I've had those experiences where I really appreciated that a leader was sharing his, thoughts and self-doubt, and then and this felt really good until he went too far.
Yeah.
And then it was like, "Oh, hold on now. I don't want you to be as vulnerable as I am. I want you to be a leader." So
Mhm.
gauging how far to take
Yeah.
self.
Boundaries are important in any situation,
Yeah.
and those boundaries are different based on your situation. My boundaries with my friends are very different than my boundaries with my clients. It's being able to gauge, what is the right level of vulnerability. But here's the thing, we're talking about leaders whose response to feeling, some insecurity is to drive people really hard, or, feeling vulnerable, not letting that come forth, and just like pushing people and being
Mhm.
that hard edged leader. Two other parts of my relationship assessment um, are faithful. So when you have are people sticking with you, and forgiving? Because just like in any relationship, if you have a positive, healthy relationship with someone and you make a mistake, if it's a positive relationship, they're going to give you the benefit of the doubt. Either that you're going
Yeah.
to make up for it, you're going to course correct, you're going to get it right the next time. That's the same with leaders. So having a positive, healthy relationship, think about if you've had a really phenomenal boss that you've just really, felt passionate about, like they're great,
Mhm.
you'll walk over glass for them,
For
right? I
sure.
mean, and happily so, because you want them to succeed. You feel like their success is going to fuel your success because that is a healthy relationship. That hard driving without the foundation of a healthy relationship is empty. That creates resentment. That creates what we call psychological reactance. Which is when we feel like someone is manipulating us or someone
Yeah.
is driving our decisions for us, or somehow we've lost our agency, we go to extraordinary lengths to regain that agency. That's psychological reactance. And I
You had
think
said your
in
model
leadership
has
situation,
5
yeah.
Fs, and I'm remembering familiar, faithful, forgiving. Did I miss the other 2 or
Faithful for I'm on the spot now. I'm gonna forget them, of course.
familiar,
So
faithful, forgiving?
familiar, faithful, forgiving, felt deeply,
Okay.
and there's one more.
It'll come to you, I bet, here in a moment.
Yes, it will.
Okay.
It
So,
will.
'cause I remembered, so the thing that I was tap dancing around, I remember the thought. So I have, I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with a woman who does, psychological profiling of CEOs that her investment banking firm is considering investing in. So,
Mm,
high risk. These are startup companies. They they believe, as an investment banking firm, they buy the CEO. Yes, yeah, they buy the concept, they buy the product, but mostly they're buying a person, a human. And she said, we've developed an assessment of CEOs, and what we ultimately determined was the one factor that was most correlated to success was a CEO's ability to hold 2 disparate thoughts in their mind at exactly the same time,
yeah,
to be about the finances and the people, to
yeah,
be about confidence and humility, to look at their market and see this aspect and a different aspect of the market, and hold them equally and
mhm,
consider them in their decision making process. And she said, we've struggled, but ultimately, once we identified that characteristic of being able to hold 2 disparate thoughts. Now, that doesn't mean you never make a decision. You have to make decisions. You have to have
sure.
insights. You have to drive things forward. But she said that is a very unique and rare capability amongst leaders. But I even saw you nodding as I was
Yeah,
saying
I would
that.
actually take it a step further and say that these are not dichotomous issues or thoughts. Being confident and being vulnerable. I think there's a certain level of confidence required to be vulnerable. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Um, I get that, we often see them that way. And again, as I said, perception drives behavior, not reality. But I think where that transformation comes is when you no longer see those as diametrical, but you see them as, at very least, a yin and yang, um, or at best, uh, inherently entwined.
mhm,
Even we're talking about like the leadership, where they think they have to drive hard, and I would say, actually, if you are someone who's very relational with your employees and they have the 5 Fs, you have permission to drive hard.
mhm.
Because they trust you, they have a connection to you, they want to see you succeed. So yeah, I'm gonna stay late at work because I want to help you, not because I want to look
Yeah,
good, or I don't want to be punished for leaving on time. Those are 2 very different ways of that situation could go. And so it's not that you can't it's not that driving hard is bad. It's driving hard without establishing or earning the right to drive hard.
Yeah.
That's, I think, where the problem lies.
I wonder if, to some degree, the modern industrial work environment, the modern, and by industrial, I don't mean factories, I mean just the modern work environment, um, has stripped away our sense of what it's like to actually belong to a tribe, like our human tribe that's more natural, meaning yeah, the natural leaders, like the people who do rise up because of whatever reason we want to follow them, or um, in other ways, human groups that just reflect the human relationships.
Yeah,
Instead, we've created this artificial environment that's replaced all of that. I mean, not that we don't have friends. Of course, we have friends, we have
right.
families, we have all of those things.
But they're
But
often not task-driven relationships either. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
Um, I think that, you know, there probably was a time, back when company loyalty was a thing, and I mean that from the company to the employee, not the other way
yeah.
around, because I think they broke it first. Um, that was, I hear, my father-in-law, was a CFO at a very large company for many years, in the 70s and 80s. And to hear him talk about the people he worked with, they were his family, like, not like in the rah, rah, we're a family fake
Mhm.
stuff, but he still, like, this is, he's been retired for 10, 15 years, and he still speaks about these people so fondly and tells stories about their exploits and, everything. Um, Everything now is so transient, you know, um, it is it is a disadvantage for people. I mean, it is financially a disadvantage for people to stay in a job too long, because you don't get,
Absolutely,
yeah,
yeah.
it's so we've created incentives that are kind of like, it's a term, perverted incentive, um, that undermine the goals that we have.
Chris, I want to be respectful of your time, but can we take a few minutes and talk about AI and
Of course.
the overall AI impact, or the on our human psychology, on our human relationships?
Absolutely.
Um, because I
I've
know
got
you've
time,
been
by the way, just so you know, I've got time if you do.
okay. I
I'm
think we
enjoying the
let's
conversation immensely,
take
so,
another 5 or 10 minutes, and
right.
we'll wrap it up. But um, and let me say to anyone who's listening, if you want more of Chris Gray, we'll include the links to his Substack. We'll include the links to his LinkedIn profile. All the links to get to Chris. We'll make sure that that's part
Appreciate
of
it.
the notes section in the episode. But what are you thinking about AI's impact on human psychology?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've really been doing a lot of thinking and writing about this recently. I find the intersection of AI, psychology, and particularly marketing, to be just fascinating. But again, I think, there you could sort of substitute out marketing for leadership, and we could have some similar discussions.
Mhm.
Um, I think the big thing. So I was this was actually sparked by another podcast where, um, I was we had it was funny because we were having a conversation, and then they kind of said, "Oh, I have one more set of questions for you," and it was about AI. So I was like, "Oh, okay." And so that kind of like, I was kind of talking off the cuff, but then it really got me thinking. Um, I think for me, I am not anti AI by any stretch. I enjoy AI as a tool. It helps me immensely. I could not run my company without it these days. But I think there's a fine line between something being a tool and something being a crutch.
Mhm.
And, that's with any tool. And I think with AI, that is particularly because it can have such far-reaching consequences. The biggest thing, I think, in the age of AI, and I think the question that they asked was, in the age of AI, what advice would you give to young professionals? And what occurred to me, and what I've been writing so much about lately, is it used to be, when I was coming up, it used to be that access to information was your advantage, right? So if you were well read, if you were able to, access, read, or,
Mhm.
whatever, surf the net, find you really good at finding information, that was an edge. That is not the case anymore. In the age of AI, anyone can get an answer about just about anything.
Yeah.
So it's not the access to information, it is discernment. Can you adequately and effectively assess the information that AI spits out oh so confidently, right? Because AI doesn't come back with a response like, oh, well, I think maybe this is the answer. No, it's like, here's the answer right here. It's polished, it's
Mhm.
confident. And so I think there's a tendency to think that someone's done the thinking behind this. And I think that assumption is really dangerous because as we know, if there have been court cases about this, the attorneys that were thrown out of court because they were,
Mhm.
citing cases that didn't exist, because they run it through AI and that's what it spit out. You know, there, I think recently another company was sued by a consumer because AI, their chatbot, told her the wrong information about a return policy, right? And what happened was, what we found with that case is that, oh, AI told us is not a defense.
Yeah.
The brand still absorbed the cost of that error, and so I think it's really important that we help younger generations develop critical thinking. And I've always been a huge fan of critical thinking. I lead workshops on it. I'm very passionate about it. Um, I think in the age of AI, it's even more important. There's a very real phenomenon. Your listeners may be familiar with it, but it's the Dunning-Kruger effect, and
Mhm.
it's a psychological bias that the less we know about a subject, we tend to be more confident about it, about our knowledge of it. And it's because typically the skill that is required to be good at and is smart about a topic is also the skill that's required to assess your knowledge of the topic. So it's saying
Right.
like the less we know, the more confident we are because we don't know what we don't know. And that's like when I talk about psychology, it's like the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. Like it's just this vast, amount of information. And that's after 35 years being a psychologist. Um, so I think that one, you have to start with humility. You know, um, in an age of confident, easy answers that are not necessarily correct, the first question should be, "What if this is wrong? What if I'm wrong about this?" In
Mhm.
fact, again, I'm going to quote Ellen Langer again, but her research has shown that simply asking the question, "What if I'm wrong about this?" decreased your susceptibility to cognitive biases by 23%. Just asking that one question. And you layer in AI, and now you've got Dunning-Kruger on turbocharge, right? Uh,
Yeah. Yeah,
you
absolutely.
get up in a suit and look polished and spew out what AI told you, and you look professional, you look smart, you look confident. You also might be very, very wrong, and that
Mhm.
might be have horrible consequences for you or your company. So, developing critical thinking, encouraging a culture where asking challenging questions is embraced and not seen as a threat, because those are the people that are going to protect you from that lawsuit, or that horrible quarter because you misread, or AI information about your customer, whatever that may be. So, I can speak for myself. I've worked in several different companies in my career, and I'd be hard pressed to really say I worked for one that embraced the questions, embraced like challenge this.
One of my team members, I had her working on a research project, and and she was openly using AI, and she presented a report about 4 pages, really good, and I would say accurate, all good and accurate. And then after we reviewed it, I said, "Okay, so tell me what you think about this." And there was panic
Yeah.
in her eyes because she thought her job was to produce a report. And what I was looking for was to produce some thought, like, tell me what you think. And trying to do that in a non, shaming way to help her see, okay, this is part of the process. Now you've done this. Now I want you to go and give it some thought and come back. We'll talk in a few days. But I think we're forgetting how to think
Yeah.
critically, how to think strategically, systemically. how to think for ourselves when it makes it so easy to feel like it's thinking for us,
Right.
even though it's not.
I think that's the important thing is you have to realize it's just assembling information. It's not thinking,
Yeah.
and it's only going to do as much um, analysis as you tell it to. And if you don't know how to analyze something, how are you going to tell a machine to do it? You know. So I think that it is just so important, and I think there probably will be a little bit of course correction on this because there are consequences
Mhm.
for bad information. And it doesn't matter where it comes from. Um, so some of it will course correct, but I hope we don't have to because that's going to be really painful for a lot of people. And so it's one of the things that, as I said, I'm passionate about. I teach critical thinking. I teach companies how to encourage discernment and critical thinking because, again, if you don't have someone in the room that is good at assessing information when the AI machine's just cranking away, that's going to be a problem.
And for those of us like you and I who are, in the world of communicating and communicating with other humans, I think we're going to see more and more people yearning for people who say things that only they can say in a way that only they can say them. That is her voice, that is his voice, that is his insight.
Yeah.
But it's becoming more rare, and I agree. I think there'll be a course correction,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah. I think there's going to, I mean, the consequences are too big. So, at some point, I think people are going to see like, oh, this isn't working quite like we'd hoped. So I think, maybe,
Yeah.
maybe I'm being overly optimistic.
Well, I actually love ending a podcast on a slightly concerned note because I think it does reflect the
Yeah.
times we are in. I don't know. Are you a fan of Game of Thrones? Did you ever
I
watch
love Game
Game
of Thrones. Yeah.
Okay,
Really.
so the original tagline, "Winter is coming."
Winter is coming.
I embrace that. I do think things are gonna get worse before they get better. I'm hoping there will be a course correction, but I think a lot of these trends are converging on us, and we're gonna see disruption
Yeah.
throughout our world. But conversations like this, I think, will help a lot of us stay sane and figure out a path to work our
Yeah.
way through.
Earlier we were talking about, someone starting out and, what advice, right? Um, and I think one of the things is, find ways to be uniquely relevant and uniquely valuable because the easy stuff, the low hanging fruit, that's gone.
Yeah.
And if you can't find a way, people ask me sometimes, "Oh, are you worried about AI taking over your job?" I'm like, absolutely not. Like my brain plus AI is way better than
Yeah.
someone who doesn't have my experience plus AI, no matter what answers it spits out. And again, it comes down to that discernment. It comes down to knowing what questions to ask it. It knows how to analyze and engage with it. And then, for me, when I'm doing research using AI, what it's doing is it's first of all, it's assembling information, but it's also prompting my knowledge base of my memory and my experience, so
Yeah.
it's, and if you don't have that, then it's just empty information that may or may not be correct.
Um, Chris, this has been fantastic. I
Great
really
conversation.
appreciate all of this. As I said, for those of you who are interested in consumer psychology and you want to connect with Chris, we'll include all of the connection information. I love a thought-provoking dialogue that I know I will end up chewing on this
Me too.
over the next couple of days. And our world is in flux. It
It
is in
certainly
flux,
is.
and we get the gift of hopefully figuring out, what this new world is ultimately going to look like. So, thank you so much. Any last thoughts you want to share before we wrap up?
I would just like to say thank you, Dan. This has been thoroughly enjoyable. Again, like you prompted me to chew on some things too. So, I'm sure I'm going to go write some notes up now.
Very fun. Thank you so much.